Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone, wherever you happen to be. My name is Carmen Mazzara, and I serve as Executive Director of APSIA, the Association of Professional Schools of International Affairs. We're so delighted to have all of you here for this conversation with alum Roshan Paul, who's going to talk to us about careers in social enterprise. This session is being recorded and will live afterwards on the APSIA YouTube page, which is where you'll find the recordings of all of our other career-focused webinars if you have questions. As we go through, if you have any technical issues, please feel free to send me a direct message. And if you have something you absolutely don't want to leave without Roshan weighing in on, please be sure to put that in the chat, and we'll do our best to get you all the content that you really want to learn today. And so with that, I'm delighted to turn the floor over to Roshan to hear a little bit more about his extraordinary career.
Great. Thank you so much, Carmen. And thanks to all of you for joining. I'm going to share my screen now. Great. Can you see the screen? Yeah, super. All right. So welcome again. Today, what I want to do is talk a little bit about building a career in social impact. This is based on the book that I co-wrote called The New Reason to Work, which came out in November of last year, and is really all about helping people understand how they can build a long-term career in social impact. The book is based on the work that I did for the last 10 years with an organization called Amani Institute, which I was the co-founder of. I'm no longer full-time with the organization. I'm still on the board, but stepped down as CEO early last year, and I'm doing something else now, but I had been founded and was running Amani Institute for the last 10 years. So today what we want to focus on is the landscape of what I call impact work or impact first work, and how do you make a choice between all the options that are available out there today. And the main reason for the session is that most people aren't aware of the full extent of jobs that you can have and careers that you can have in social impact. So we're hopefully going to demystify that a little bit and share a little bit more about all the options. All right, so firstly, why is this important? Today, we find that there's a rising demand for impact work and for careers with purpose, and that this demand is actually, we would even go so far as to say, is changing the job market itself. You know, there have been a push to, things like diversity, equity, and inclusion, things like sustainability, the B Corp movement. All of this is really putting a lot of pressure on companies today to include impact as one of the things that they care about and that they are bringing front and center in their companies, but also in social impact organizations as well. So I think this movement started, obviously there have been social impact careers for a long time, and we'll get into that. But I think the modern or more recent push starts with the Great Recession in 2008, as a lot of people started to ask the question, if banks that are 100 years old can collapse overnight and governments can collapse overnight, then, what's the point of me sitting in this cubicle working, for my paycheck when there's no such thing as a stable and secure job anymore? And that led the whole movement to lots and lots of people interested in social enterprise, social entrepreneurship, and working to do things that are more in line with their values and more in line with how they'd like the world to be. COVID, like the Great Recession, COVID started it. Was another one of these global shocks that really made a lot of people question what they want to do with work. And that led to, this movement that we're calling the Great Resignation, and has 1,000 names and 1,000 theories why it's happening. But what's certainly true is that, people are rethinking their equation with work and what the role that they want work to play in their lives. And many people have many different approaches towards this, but one approach that is one part of this puzzle that is gaining a lot of traction is this idea of purpose in the workplace, and that the future of work must include a conversation of what's the larger purpose of work than just making money or returning value to shareholders. That work must be about more than that. It has to be about something bigger than ourselves. And that's why, in the book, we have this quote that we believe the future of work is one in which your job description includes not only your title, responsibilities, and salary, but also a convincing case for the impact that your work will create. So we imagine that in future job descriptions, they'll also try to sell you on your impact and not just on your salary and your title and so on. When we talk about impact first jobs, what are we talking about? We're talking about jobs where you use the majority of your time and effort with the primary intention to improve the human condition. It's not about your own or your organization's bottom line. It's not that social impact is a side benefit, but it's the core purpose of the job. So any job where having an impact is the core purpose is what we call impact first jobs. And I want to spend a little bit of time on this slide to tell you a little bit about how the field evolved, and this will also show you how the opportunities are more and more today and have never been more so today than at any other time in history, right? So if you're today looking to build a career in social impact, you're definitely better off than people were 20 years ago, 40 years ago. So this field, I would say, starts in the 19th century, when a few of the richest people in America started to create the first foundations, the first philanthropies. And they started to create things like libraries and hospitals and other types of civil society organizations, or they start to fund those kinds of organizations. And it was the first recognition that neither government nor business can solve all problems, that we needed another class of organizations to come about that was also playing a role in solving social problems. This then led to the rise of these kinds of organizations, which we might call non-governmental organizations or non-profit organizations, NGOs, civil society organizations. They go with different names, but this was first brought about by the fact that there were rich people willing to put their money to fund it. One of the most famous of these organizations is probably the International Committee for the Red Cross, which is for many people, the paradigm NGO that started in the 1860s or something, but really came into prominence after World War I, when it played a huge role in alleviating suffering on the battlefield. And that led to the rise of a number of other famous NGOs today. Think about Save the Children, the World Wildlife Fund, Plan International, Catholic Relief Services. These all got created between World War I and probably the early 1950s or 1960s. And these organizations are probably the most well-known, but also the biggest and the most widely spread organizations in our field today. Then post-World War II, you started to see the rise of what we call multilateral and government aid agencies. So multilateral agencies are the United Nations, the World Bank, the IMF. These all were created after World War II to try to create global solutions for global problems, realizing that things like nuclear weapons or environmental damage was not only one country's problem, but a lot of countries have to come together. The post-World War II world also led to the rise of government aid agencies. So if you think of things like USAID, UK Aid, Japan has its own agency, GIZ in Germany. These are all aid agencies, primarily from rich countries that exist to provide money to improve international development around the world. Then you fast forward to the 1980s and you see the rise of what's called today social entrepreneurship or social business. This started in 1981 with an organization called Ashoka that kickstarted the field of social entrepreneurship. And that led to a rethinking that it doesn't just have to be NGOs, but it could also be individuals that are using more entrepreneurial approaches and even sometimes selling goods and services with the ultimate goal of having social impact. So I would say social entrepreneurship starts in the 1980s, but really only, really kicks off probably in the early 2000s. Around this time, as you're starting to see social businesses grow, we start to see the rise of a new category of organizations called intermediaries. Intermediaries are organizations that are themselves not working with disadvantaged populations, but are working to support the nonprofits and social businesses that are working directly with disadvantaged populations, right? So think about research firms, think about consulting firms, think about training and capacity building firms. these firms are only possible in a professionalized social sector or social impact first sector, because they're now the organizations building the capacity of the NGOs and the social businesses that are on the front lines. And intermediaries is probably the fastest growing type of organizations today as the sector becomes more and more professional. Then in 2006, something big happened where for the first time a social entrepreneur won the Nobel Peace Prize. So Mohammed Yunus and the Grameen Bank were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007. Microfinance had been around, obviously, again, since the 70s or 80s, but it really took off. And it went out from just microcredit, which was the core of microfinance, to other kinds of micro enterprises, whether it was micro insurance, micro energy, micro health, and lots of other kinds of things that microfinance played a role in kickstarting. And so as we started to see finance play more of a role in social impact, you started to see the rise of different kinds of money coming into the sector with impact investing and so on. And all of that, just increased the consciousness that business can play a role in driving social impact. And that's what led many corporations to also start to say, we want to play a role in social change as well. And that's why today, if you're on LinkedIn today, you'll see so many director of social impact roles at many companies that 20 years ago would never even have considered having a social impact role in their organization, in their company, but today it's happening more and more. There's a field called conscious capitalism that's really been encouraging this and driving this forward. But overall, you can see that for lots of companies, it's no longer enough just to make profit, that they also must play a role in making the world a better place. And in fact, the stock market rewards them for it, because there's also a lot of research coming out saying that companies that have a more explicit purpose beyond just making money are actually making more money than companies that don't have that. So purpose is also being rewarded in financial performance today as well. So you put all of this together and you lead more and more to a world where more and more jobs are becoming impact first jobs, and there's more jobs like this than ever before. How do you choose, right? Okay, so there's this array of options out there. How do you make choices between them as a graduate student or an undergraduate student coming out of university today? So what we've done is we've looked at 6 questions that you can choose, that can help you to rank between these choices to see what is most relevant for you. And I'm going to go over those questions now, and then I'll share an example of somebody who has been living through all of these questions, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So the first question that we ask is, how important is it for you to interact directly with the beneficiaries of your work, right? If you want to work on the front lines directly with disadvantaged populations, then you may want to work with a local nonprofit or community organization. You may want to work with a social business or a microfinance agency and so on. And for some people, that's what makes them happy. They want to see their impact on a tangible level. But for other people, they're more interested in working at the system level. They want to make change on a macro scale. And for them, you may want to then consider working with a government agency, a multilateral like the UN or the World Bank. You may want to consider working for a development consulting firm that works across a range of topics. You may want to consider working at a foundation where you're giving money to other people and you're looking more at the system in which a problem is occurring. So depending on your personality type, depending on what you prefer to do, that may then help you choose what type of organization best fits for you. And my belief on this is that it's important for everyone who wants to work in social impact to have both experiences, so that you can understand how both sides operate, whether at the systems level or at the field level. So it's good to get both, and then you'll then decide which is better for you. The next question is, how important is your income and your lifestyle, right? And this is a question that will have different answers at different stages in your career. Perhaps you're in your 20s and money isn't a driving factor right now for you. You can maybe take more risks and maybe go work with a small local organization, or even start up your own organization. You may want to work with a social business that is just starting up, and so on. However, perhaps you're in a stage in your life where money is important. You have a family to support, maybe you have loans to pay off from grad school and things like that. And so you then may want to look at jobs that, in corporations that have an impact role. You could look at the World Bank or the UN. A lot of those times that income is tax-free. You can get paid very well. Similarly, foundations and impact investing firms also can pay quite well at times. So again, at different stages in your life, this will be important in different ways. But depending on that, you can then try to choose what type of organization fits you. A third question is, how dedicated are you to a particular cause or geographic location, right? If you really care about, let's say, health, then you may want to look at nonprofits working with health, or foundations that are funding things related to healthcare, or let's say part of the UN that is working on healthcare, like the World Health Organization, or so on, right? Or perhaps you're dedicated to a particular geography, right? Like for family reasons or for your own passion. Let's say that you're from South Africa and you can't leave South Africa. Then you may want to look at foundations that are supporting work in South Africa, or social businesses or nonprofits working in South Africa. And I just made up South Africa. You could, say that for any choice of geography that's important to you. On the other hand, perhaps geography isn't important, or cause isn't important, and you want to work across a range of geographies or a range of causes. Well, then you might consider working for a large development agency that has work in multiple countries and works across lots of causes. So large NGOs could be a good place for that. Development consulting firms or a lot of intermediaries will work across a range of causes: education, health, renewable energy, gender, whatever it may be, and across a number of countries as well, right? If you, for instance, work for a humanitarian aid agency, you'd go to wherever the latest sort of disaster has happened or conflict is happening, and maybe you want to work there for a while and then switch to another area. So whether you want to focus on one geography or whether you want to focus on lots of geographies, that can also help you determine which type of organization or which type of part of the sector is a good fit for you. Let's go to the next set of questions. So increasingly today, organizational culture and work environment is really important to people. So, what type of organization culture do you prefer, right? So let's take something like autonomy, right? So generally, you'll find that the smaller and younger an organization is, the more freedom and autonomy you'll have to innovate, to try new things, to take more risks, and prove yourself, quicker. The larger and more bureaucratic an organization is, the less risks that you can take, and the more bureaucracy, and the more rules and so on, that you'll have to face. And again, this is a personality choice for people. Some people are completely fine with bureaucracy and rules-based environments and thrive in that, and other people would hate that, and they would prefer to work in a more autonomous, sort of horizontal, flat hierarchies and so on. Typically, those will be found in social businesses and intermediaries, in younger types of organizations and smaller types of organizations in general. Travel is another one, right? For some people, travel is a perk. They like to travel. They want to go around the world. For other people, they don't want to travel because they don't like traveling, or they have to stay close to their family and so on. And again, depending on your answer to that question, if you like travel, you may want to look at a consulting firm or a UN agency or an intermediary. If you don't like travel, you may want to work for a local nonprofit or a local social enterprise or something like that. You then may want to think about what type of work do you enjoy, right? Do you like to manage projects? In which case, working for a development organization that has a range of different projects, or a social enterprise, would be helpful. If you like to fundraise, you'll never be out of a job, because that's what everyone's looking for. If you like to do research, then you may want to look at more government or roles, or research firms that are in the intermediary category, and so on. So again, the type of work you and most enjoy will also help you to pick the kind of organization that you might want to join. And finally, what kind of organizations do your previous educations and experiences set you up for? Similar to the work culture question, we also typically find that the younger an organization and the smaller an organization is, the less they care about your background in terms of organization and experience. They care more about commitment, about motivation, they look for generalists who are willing to do a range of different things. The older, more bureaucratic an organization is, the more likely they are to look for a master's from a well-known university, a PhD, things like that. So again, it's like the more bureaucratic an organization is, or the more credential-oriented an organization is, the more they care about whether you have an MBA or whether you went to law school or whether you have a PhD or something. So again, different types of organizations will care about this to different degrees as well. And, you know, for some people, education doesn't matter. Professional experience is all that counts. For other people, it could be the exact opposite. So again, it depends on the type of organization and the type of work. So those are the 6 questions that can help you to choose between all of these options. I want to tell you a quick story of a friend of mine. Her name is Celia Cruz. You know, and hopefully through the story, we'll try to illustrate the types of options as well as the types of choices. So Celia starts her career at IBM in Brazil, where she's from, and she realizes quickly that she doesn't like selling computers. So she decides to quit her job and go do a master's abroad and travel around the world, volunteering with different NGOs in Nepal, in Canada, in Europe as well. And then she returns to Brazil and becomes a fundraising consultant. So she becomes an intermediary herself and is working as a consultant to different nonprofits as a fundraiser. That leads to a role as in a non-governmental organization, as she leads a small local nonprofit in Brazil, which leads her back into the intermediary space as she becomes the head of Ashoka's office in Brazil. So she works in social entrepreneurship and leads Ashoka Brazil. And then when she leaves that, she moves into impact investing, which is another kind of finance mechanism for social organizations, and is now, you know, running an ecosystem impact investing organization, which is trying to encourage more impact investing in Brazil, right? So you can see her career has moved in different ways. How did she make these choices? So one of the things she realized early on is that she's better suited to organizational level or systems level work, not working directly with beneficiaries or disadvantaged populations. In her case, it was because she said she feels she gets quite emotionally attached or emotionally affected when she sees suffering. So she doesn't want to be in those situations. She prefers to work at the macro systemic level. She realized early on that, you know, even though she's traveled and worked in other places, she's, you know, she's best suited to support work in Brazil. So she picks Brazil as her geography and focuses on that. She also sees early on that she likes working in autonomous and flat cultures because she's really interested in innovation. So for her, she wanted to work in social entrepreneurship, impact investing, intermediaries, as opposed to government agencies or United Nations or larger organizations like that. Given her background, her educational background in economics, she was well suited also to work in intermediaries in entrepreneurship and finance and so on. As for her salary, you know, when she started, she was working in local nonprofits, not making a lot of money. Then she worked in social entrepreneurship and impact investing as her kids were, you know, going through high school. And now that her kids are off to college, she and her husband are looking at, you know, taking on more work that fits their passions a bit more, where salary becomes less important. So she can even foresee, you know, a time in her 50s, and say she's in her 50s now, but in her 60s, where she no longer works for money and is just doing what she's most passionate about, as well as she doesn't have those, you know, financial needs that she had when her kids were younger. So that's just an example of one person whose, you know, career and lifestyle flows across all of these different organizations and choices. So I'll end with an exercise for you. You can take a screenshot of this if you like, you know, and do this later. But I would encourage you to identify, you know, the 3 types of impact first organizations of all the organizations that I shared earlier. What are 3 that most interest you, given your passions and given your background? And then using the 6 questions, rank them in order of priority for you to pursue. Many of you are current students, you're going out, you're looking for jobs, or you're going to be soon looking for jobs. So using these 6 questions, you can rank the organizations in terms of what's most relevant for you. And then the third part is, we sometimes learn best when we teach. So I would say make a list of 3 people with whom you can share your new knowledge about the impact sector, because they will benefit from it as well. So with that, I'm going to wrap up and turn it over to Q&A. I just have one last question for you. Like, my interest with doing the session and talking to all of you is I'm really interested to take the ideas from this book to as many universities as possible, because students are our core audience for this book. So I very much welcome your ideas for how we can bring an understanding of careers and social impact to your university. Everything I shared right now is just one chapter of this larger book that goes into a lot more detail into how to build a career in social impact. So you can reach me on email or on LinkedIn, and I'd really welcome the chance to have a conversation with you as well. So with that, I will stop my screen share and turn it over to Q&A.
Thank you, Roshan, so much. Folks, when you have questions, please feel free to throw those in the chat. And while you're typing, since my mic is on, Roshan, I'm curious, you talked about a number of questions people can ask themselves, but a lot of folks wrestle with trying to find authentic work to do. As you said, lots of companies wear this mantle of social impact work, but fewer of them actually deliver. So I'm curious if you have recommendations of questions students could ask organizations or use to filter out when they read a website to figure out who's really delivering and where it's mostly just marketing and fluffiness.
Yeah, thanks, Carmen. So I think when it comes to marketing and fluffiness, you're right that you'll probably see most of that with pure for-profit organizations that are trying to move into the impact space. Sometimes it will be marketing, perhaps. Sometimes I'd like to give people the benefit of the doubt as well, and sometimes they're genuinely interested in it, but they don't know how. And I think you can ask questions around how they plan to do it, like what parts of this are beyond the mission or the value statements that they put up on a wall, and what's actually being lived in the way they run their teams. So if they have a value around inclusion, for instance, you could see, well, how does that play out at the team level, not just in terms of your customers or your suppliers, but also in your own teams and the organization. How does that work? So that could be one type of question. I think this is less an issue with, obviously, organizations that are dedicated to social impact, were founded to work on social impact, which is still the majority of organizations. Of course, you can question the level of impact. You can question whether the work they're doing is truly impactful, is making a difference. And I think the way to do that is to look at what are beneficiaries on the ground saying about those organizations. Are they truly having the impact that they say they're going to have? And if you can't see, that, I think do your research in terms of reading what's been written about them and so on.
Thank you. And you shared Celia's story, but could you share a little bit about your own journey and maybe how you got to answers on those 6 questions?
Sure. So I started my career in social entrepreneurship coming out of undergrad. I am from India, but I had done my undergrad in the United States. And I was looking at jobs in consulting and investment banking as I was graduating, like most foreign students in the US. But then my final year of college coincided with September 11th, which was followed, of course, by racial attacks on people who look like me, and the rush to war with Afghanistan and then Iraq. Meanwhile, my home country of India was also having terrorist attacks and also having a lot of religious conflict. And so it seemed to me that the 2 countries that I knew best were on fire, and there would be little good that I could do working in a consulting firm. So that's when I decided to turn down a lucrative opportunity with a well-known consulting firm. It was a recession year, 2002, so everyone thought I was crazy. But I ended up saying no to a potential opportunity and moving back to India and starting to work for Ashoka in social entrepreneurship. And at that time in my life, money didn't matter as much, so I didn't make a lot of money. I very much had to do some moonlighting with other jobs to pay the bills. But I loved the work and I loved what I was doing, and over time grew that into a career in social entrepreneurship with Ashoka. So I was with them for 10 years, including when I went back to the US and did my master's at the Kennedy School, and then continued working for Ashoka in their Washington, DC headquarters. And then around that time, I started to, thanks to some of the work I was doing, started to keep coming across this question that are people being prepared for careers in social impact adequately at their universities? And the answer that I felt, feeling that I learned, even though I was privileged to have the best education possible, that I was learning more at work than I was at school. And so how can we bring in a different element into people's education that can complement what the universities are doing? So with that question in mind, along with a colleague at Ashoka, I quit my job in 2012 and moved to Nairobi, Kenya, to start an organization called Amani Institute, which was dedicated to complementing what universities are doing by providing students opportunities to have more field-based, experiential education, more focused on building skills that were in demand by employers around the world in the social impact space. And we created like a master's equivalent kind of fellowship program that was open to anyone from anywhere. And yeah, over the last, I would say 10 years, we've had about 700 people from 60 countries, 70 countries come through that program. And then the organization grew into 2 or 3 other kinds of work as well. And so I was leading Amani Institute for about 10 years. And then, last year I stepped down, and I'm now moving into a career, trying to build a career more in the climate change realm, because that's my, new passion that I want to dedicate my time to.
Great. One of our students wonders, how do you maintain boundaries? They find that the field of social entrepreneurship is 12-hour days, 7 days a week, with networking and all of those kinds of interactions that are required to move these goals forward. And they find it really draining. So they're curious how you handle that.
Yeah, it's a really important question, and it's very true. There's no end, right? When you're working in social impact, these problems have been around for hundreds of years. They may be around for hundreds more years. There's no end to what you can do. And so it's very easy, especially when you're passionate about something, to not have boundaries around it and to spend all your time on it. And you'll see that this is a very common trait with social entrepreneurs. Unfortunately, it's not very sustainable either. And so you often have a lot of burnout in the social impact space as well. And so it's really important to maintain boundaries. How do you do that? We actually have a whole chapter in the book around that. And it's really around creating a set of practices that, come from the scientific literature, particularly in positive psychology, around, making sure you're investing in other things that make you happy, your relationships, your hobbies, and so on. It also includes keeping control of your empathy so that you're not too affected by the suffering you might see around you, and you're able to turn that on and off. Sabbaticals are really important, making sure that you're getting the time off that you need, and so on. And the other thing is that this works differently for different people, right? For some people, weekends are very important, and they need to really only work the 40-hour work week and take lots of time off on weekends and so on. And for other people, they don't mind working very hard for like a couple of years at a stretch and then taking a few months off or a year off or things like that. So again, I would say, different people will answer this question differently. So do whatever works best for you around this. So again, I could talk a lot more about this, Shema, but I would say that, do what works for you, but it's very important to keep those boundaries, because at the end of the day, there's no end in sight for the work that you can have to do in this space.
You'll never be out of work, I guess, for good or for ill. And for those who are wondering, yes, the recording of the session will be available on APSIA's YouTube page by the end of today. So our next question is, do you see the possible disadvantages of corporations getting involved in social impact work? whether it's doing more harm than good, or if they're getting too much power in decision making, and that draws away from the role of the public sector, excuse me. And are there ways that the good can be maximized and the harm can be mitigated?
Mhm. I think that there's no one answer to that question. I think in some cases there are definitely disadvantages. And it depends which side of this you stand on. Like, so if you're purely on the for-profit side, you might say it's a disadvantage for companies to focus on anything apart from making money. If you're completely on the nonprofit side, you may say no, companies shouldn't come into the space where there shouldn't be a profit motive or a profit incentive to solve problems or to reduce suffering, and so on. So, I think there'll be, in some cases, it could be an advantage. In some cases, it could be a disadvantage. Regardless, it's happening and it's going to keep happening. There's a lot of areas where the government is failing and has been failing. And so it's important for civil society actors or companies to step up and do what they can. In some parts of the world, the public sector is very strong and is providing a lot of services and doing well. In many parts of the world, the public sector is extremely weak or extremely corrupt, and isn't really doing what it's supposed to do. And that's why you need other people to step in to help the less advantaged in society. I think it's important to look at it at a case-by-case basis, both in terms of the company, in terms of the cause, and in terms of the country we're in, to see, whether something is more good or more bad. But regardless, it's happening and it's going to keep happening, I think. So our challenge is to try to see how we can, encourage the good and maybe try to mitigate for the bad.
Thank you. You've talked a little bit about some of the financial trade-offs that come with the work. And one of our students is wondering, they're worried about going further into debt if they launch a social enterprise. And they're wondering if you have any advice, particularly psychological advice, about how to get ready and push through and get something off the ground.
Gosh, this is, again, it's such a personal question. I think different people are in different circumstances with their existing debt that they may have, or existing financial resources, the family resources that they can bring to bear. Psychologically, what I would say is that expect it to involve more money than you think it will. And, know that going in. If you're going to go into debt, and it's not for me to say whether you should or shouldn't go into debt for your social enterprise, but if you were to go, into debt, I think it's good to start to create those safety nets for yourself, whether that comes in the form of education, or whether that comes in the form of a part-time job, or support from your family or your spouse, or whatever it may be. I think it's important to start to create those safety nets so that you don't go fully in, and then if something collapses, you're in trouble. All of this happens. Social entrepreneurs can often find themselves in those kinds of situations because they're willing to put everything on the line for that cause. I don't think that's advisable. I would make sure that you're saving, and make sure that you're able to have those safety nets or those lifelines out as well. That's my personal opinion. I think, again, this is something that it will be different for different people based on their own situations.
Do you have any insights on how you got the funding to get started, or how you were able to scale, and where that money might have come from?
Yeah, so I come from a middle-class family. I spent my entire 20s working for a low-paying nonprofit organization. So when I was starting mine, I didn't have a lot of financial resources to fall back on. So what I did was, for the first 2 years of doing all the feasibility work and the research and the program design and planning, I kept my day job, and I would work 9 to 5 on my day job, and then like evenings and weekends on my startup social enterprise. And then after 2 years, I switched it. So I then was working my social enterprise during the day, and then my job was evenings and weekends. So for about 2.5 to 3 years, I essentially worked 2 jobs full time, and I don't recommend that. It's not fun, but it was necessary for me because I didn't have the money to, just do this and nothing else. I needed to keep paying the bills and paying off my grad school debt, and all of that. So, I did that for about 3 years, and so did my co-founder, where we, it helped because we were still making money and we were able to put that money into the nonprofit, or at least cover our own expenses. And then I quit my job, even after the first revenue had come through. As our first class of fellows was starting is when I quit my job. So, and then as I was able to pay myself a salary with my social enterprise as well. So that was my journey through it. And then I, been good at saving constantly. So when I quit last year and took a bit of a break and took a sabbatical, I also had some savings to fall back on, which was very important. So that's how I went about it. It's not everyone's journey. Some people can't afford to work 2 jobs full time because maybe they have kids as well. I didn't at the time. I think depending on your personal circumstances, certain things may be possible and certain things may not. If you've got a spouse that can support you, again, I didn't have that either. I was single. Then, that can help a lot. If as a family you decide that this is a path that you want to take. Of course, if you've got, personal or family wealth to support that, that's the best situation of all.
I suspect a lot of folks would say that's the best situation when others can share that with you. One of the common phrases that we hear is, X organization is trying to work themselves out of a job. They want to fix this particular problem and then not be needed anymore. Do you feel like that should be the aim for those who are either starting their own business or moving into this space, or how would you react to that kind of thinking?
I think that that's historically the lens, right? Or the view people have is that if I can solve this problem, then I've worked myself out of a job. And I think in small ways that's possible. The large problems, have been around for millennia, poverty, hunger, education, healthcare. These are things that will always be with us, perhaps, as humanity, right? I mean, we can dream about a world without poverty or without hunger, and maybe we'll get there one day, but it's not going to happen, potentially in our lifetimes, right? So I think it's important to say that I think it's liberating, actually, to say that, like, I'm not going to solve this problem myself. I can play the best role that I can to move humanity forward, to make progress, but it's not on me to make sure that, like, no child lacks an education anywhere in the world, right? Or that no person feels hunger anywhere in the world. Like, that's not my responsibility. My responsibility is to do everything I can to make sure that X number of people don't have hunger, or X number of children can get an education. And I've made a contribution to move humanity forward by doing that. I think expecting that some of these problems will be solved in the next decade, or with the next, great app or cryptocurrency or whatever it might be, is a little naive. I think these problems will be with us for a while, and in some cases, as we are unfortunately seeing in Ukraine, that sometimes we think we've gotten past certain parts of humanity, and some, the world can just drag us back into the previous century sometimes too. So sometimes it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, as well. And that's just, I think, part of the journey of human progress. So I don't think I think it's important to have a vision where you work yourself out of a job. I'm not sure happiness will come from the expectation that you will succeed at it, if that makes sense. If you can play your part to move humanity forward, you've done a great job.
I like that approach. I think sometimes it feels like one hasn't succeeded because they haven't cured these centuries old problems, but every piece moves the arc a little closer to bending in that direction. Students, we still have a little bit more time, so please feel free to throw your questions in the chat. One of the things I'm curious about is something I've struggled with, which is the pace of change. Some of the organizations you've described move very slowly, but move on a huge scale. Billions of dollars, but it takes 10 years to move. Some organizations move dozens of dollars, but it takes minutes to move.
Yeah.
How do you recommend students either understand their own comfort level with the pace of change or come to understand how the speed and rate that organizations might move?
I think it's really important to get an experience of both kinds of that, right? Like, so sometimes smaller organizations working at smaller scales can be more nimble and move faster. And some people really like that. I'm one of those people who really like that. I like to be in things that can move fast and you can try lots of different things. For other people, they really care about the big systems level changes, and they are okay with the fact that that might take 2 decades to make a policy change, and they accept the trade-offs that come with the compromises with engaging with politics and politicians and so on in order to make those changes happen. So I'm not one of those people. Like, I don't have the patience to or the appetite for the compromises of politics. So I like to do my thing in a small scale and try to move things forward and hand it over to the next person to take it forward after that. But I've done both. I've been at both levels, and I realize which I like. And I'm probably somewhere in between, that I'm not directly on the ground with beneficiaries, nor am I, in high government posts, but I'm somewhere in the middle at that ecosystem intermediary kind of level. And that's where I found best sits for me. I think for other people, it'll be different based on their personality, their passions, their skills, and so on.
And students, I think this is where your career offices can be so helpful in helping you ask yourself those questions, see those internships and fellowships that are going to give you those levels of exposure. I'm curious, in other spaces, there are some universal skills, regardless of what level you want to work in or what kind of organization you want to work in. Are there elements that you think, no matter where these students may end up on their journey, they should definitely try to focus on?
100%. And here's my like I don't know it's not spoiler, but those skills are not skills you'll get in university. Those are the kind of the soft skills or the human skills that are important regardless of your career, right? You'll often in management, there's this famous quote that you get hired for your technical skills or your hard skills, but you get fired for your soft skills, right? Having the technical credentials, whether it's in finance or in law or in being an Excel wizard, whatever it may be, that'll get you a job. But then whether you succeed and thrive and grow will depend on whether you can master the human skills. So things like interpersonal communication, working well with others, managing yourself so you don't bring your own issues onto the table with the people you're dealing with, and that you're able to manage your own emotions as well. Leadership skills. Can you take responsibility for something? Can you take initiative? Can you see that there's a mission that's larger than your own job description and take responsibility for that mission? So things like responsibility, initiative, problem solving, these are core leadership skills that are really important. Another one is creativity. So innovation. Don't think about innovation as the iPhone or Bitcoin or something like that. Think about innovation as day-to-day problem solving, that you see a problem and you figure out a creative approach to overcome that problem. That creative, innovative thinking is probably one of the most critical success factors in society today, if you can have those skills, because the world is changing fast, it's changing dramatically, it's changing in unexpected ways thanks to a pandemic from one angle and a war from another angle, things that we're not expecting. And so we need to be able to adapt and we need to be able to solve problems. Then there's another set of skills around adaptability, resilience, managing your own mental health, your well-being, things like that, that will also position you for long-term success as well. So I think that there's a set of these human skills, that personal, individual skills that are really important as well. And one really interesting, test that you can even you can try yourself is that ask employers, right? Ask people who hire people, what are the most valuable things about, your best employee. Like what makes your best employee your best employee? And also conversely, what makes your worst employee your worst employee? You'll never hear an answer that comes in the form of technical skills, like they're really good at finance or they're really good at coding and things like that. You'll always hear things that are about them as a person, like that they complain too much, or they're really good at jumping into things and taking leadership. It'll always be on personal qualities and not technical skills. So that's why I think the personal qualities is really the thing that separates the people who are very successful than the ones that aren't.
I would think that some of the other traits you've mentioned, like fundraising and writing and public communications, would also come into it, or do you put those in the harder skill bucket?
I tend to put those in the harder skill buckets. Like the other thing interesting in the harder skills is that you can learn them through a course, right? And you can take that course at any stage in your career. It doesn't have to be in your graduate schooling. You can take it an online course. You can take it at community college. You can take it at different levels, or you can learn it on the job, right? So that's another way that you can learn. It's these human skills that I think are like harder to learn without a very intentional practice around becoming a better leader, becoming a better communicator, managing yourself better, and things like that. So I think those things matter up to a point. Again, those are things that will get you a job. They're not the things that will make you succeed in your job.
Excellent, thank you. Folks, we have about 9 minutes left, so please feel free to throw your questions in the chat. Roshan, I'm curious, broader advice that you might have as students think about the next step, whether they're a first year getting ready for the second year getting ready to graduate. If they wanted to follow you into social enterprise, key things they should be doing. If they should be staying the heck away from social enterprise, key things they should be doing. Broader advice you wish you had back then.
I think the really important thing is to get started. Whether you're like, maybe for some people that they know exactly what they want to do and they're really passionate about, solar energy, let's say, I'm just throwing that out there, finding ways in which you can work with either a solar company or a nonprofit that is doing solar renewable energy work, or a microcredit organization that's helping people access solar panels. Like even you take something like solar energy, there's like 6 different angles that you can bring to that. And I think it's important to get started and figure out like what's the quickest and fastest way for you to get into that. Perhaps you don't know what you really want to do. I think it's a process then of discovery, trying to keep your options open. Maybe look at an intermediary or a consulting firm, something that's working across a broad range of topics, and trying to, find ways in which you can broaden your own horizons and broaden your own learning as well. Podcasts, TED Talks, books, you name it, like keep learning. Your education doesn't end with your degree. It continues for life. I think we're in an era of rapid life change, and therefore lifelong learning is really important as well. Or learning how to learn is critical as well. So I would say those are things. I think if there's one thing I would have liked to have been told maybe when I was 25 or something, is that one is you've got to keep learning, you've got to keep reinventing yourself and thinking of, realizing that every 5 or 6 years you may need to do another fellowship program or another online course or something to keep building your skills, because the world is moving really fast. And then secondly, that your career is long, like I don't know, what the average age on this call is, but if it's a lot of graduate students, I would imagine it's somewhere between like the mid to late 20s. And I would say realize that you're going to be working for as long as you've been alive, right? And so it's a long path ahead, and that actually should be seen as a liberating idea, because there's almost no choice you can make now that is permanent. Anything you do, you can find your way back into different things as well as you keep learning and keep growing.
Excellent. Makes me feel a little old, I'm not going to lie, but excellent advice. I have 2 last questions to close out. One is about the element of getting political in your work and how critical those political contacts might be, or whether that's just another kind of networking. that one might need to do in the social impact space?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I think it's more like a choice, because again, I'm used to countries where it's not so easy to work with government, and you know, there may be a lot of ethical or integrity compromises you may need to make in order to do so. But a lot of people would disagree with me. A lot of people would say the exact opposite, that getting political is absolutely the key aspect of the work, that we only make long-term lasting change through policy change, through working with government bodies, and that you must try to do that. And a lot of social entrepreneurs count success as when the government adopts their work and scales it up to, you know, to a larger audience. So for a lot of people, that is the way. And there are certain causes, let's say anything to do with rights, you know, or anything to do with any of the isms, right? Racism, sexism, whatever it is. You know, I think like policy change and all of that is going to be very important. There's a whole other set of social problems that need to be solved where government, you know, may not or should not play a role. So maybe my answer to your question, Shaima, is actually it depends on the cause. Like there are some things where it matters and there are some things where it may matter less.
And our final closeout question is back to that element of safety and security. And so our colleagues are wondering, how do you evaluate job security, especially in the early startup stages, when things could go wrong?
Yeah, so early stage startups are definitely riskier than organizations that have been around for a while. They could easily fold, and so job security may not be something you can count on. That said, you know, one of the things that we've been learning the last 10 years is that even big companies can fold. Now, it's likely to happen less, but, you know, taking a job just for job security and stability won't necessarily lead to happiness either. So I think the trick is to find yourself somewhere in between where, you know, you have a little bit of job security, or you're okay with the risk that it takes right now for a period of time to see if that startup will grow. You know, and the other side of the coin is realizing that you need to find purpose and meaning, you know, beyond the security of the job itself.
That's great advice for students, whatever sector they end up in. Well, thank you all for joining us today. Roshan, thank you so much for all of your advice and for sharing the book with us as a way that our students can continue their ongoing learning. And I hope that you all who are able will draw on it and find it a good source of wisdom. And then as you were invited to maybe bring it to your university as a way to continue to share it with others and grow their learning and their understanding of this wonderful space. We look forward to seeing all of you at future APSIA webinars. On April 4th, we'll have one on careers in commercial diplomacy. So please feel free to check with your career offices for more details on that. Thank you all so much for being here. And Roshan, thank you so much in particular for all of your great advice and the reassurance that there's lots of purpose in many different spaces out there. And so have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone. Take care.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. And feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or over email as well. Happy to connect.